I still remember the sound of the band playing when my world shattered. Everyone was smiling, laughing, except me. I stood there in my old suit, hands trembling as my daughter, my only child, walked down the aisle. She looked radiant, like her mother once did before she passed away. I thought I'd finally done something right in this life. But then, the groom, my new son-in-law, took the microphone. He grinned like a man who owned the world, and then he said the words that cut through me like a knife. "Dad, why don't you hand over the farm keys right here? Make it official in front of everyone." Laughter filled the room. Some thought it was a joke, but he wasn't joking. He reached out his hand, waiting for me to obey, like a servant. My daughter looked away, pretending not to see my humiliation. 50 years of my life, reduced to a wedding gift. My heart pounded, my throat burned with shame. But I said nothing, not yet, because revenge, my friend, tastes better when it's aged, just like my pain. And that night I swore I'd make him beg for what he'd done. He thought I'd give up my land. He never imagined I'd take his world instead. Before all this pain, my life was simple, maybe too simple. I woke up with the sunrise every day for 40 years, long before the roosters even thought of crowing. The farm was my world, acres of golden wheat, whispering under the morning breeze, and the smell of wet soil after rain. People say land doesn't love you back, but they're wrong. Mine did. It gave me purpose when life took everything else. I wasn't born into wealth. My hands earned every inch of that soil. When my wife Mary got sick, I sold half the cattle to pay for her treatment. She didn't survive, but I promised her I'd raise our daughter right, kind, humble, and strong. That promise became my religion. Raising a child alone isn't easy, especially when you're both father and mother. I cooked her breakfast before school, even when the stove barely lit. I braided her hair clumsily, always too tight, and she'd laugh and say, "Dad, you're hopeless." That laugh kept me alive. Every harvest season, I'd tuck a little money away. College fund, I called it. Even when times were hard, I never touched it. When she finally got into university, I cried alone in the barn. Not because I was sad, but because I realized my little girl was growing wings. I lived modestly. My shoes wore thin. My truck groaned with every mile. But she never lacked anything. I missed weddings, birthdays, and nights out, just to make sure she could have the life I never did. Neighbors said I spoiled her. Maybe I did. But when your heart has only one person left to love, you give them the world, even if it costs your soul. Sometimes, after long days, I'd sit on the porch and talk to Mary's photograph. I'd tell her, "She's doing good, love. You'd be proud." And I meant it. My daughter was my pride, my reason to breathe. When she brought Eric home for the first time, I saw how her eyes sparkled around him. He was polite, charming, the kind of man any father would trust. He talked about dreams, business, and how much he loved her. I believed every word, foolishly. I even let him work with me for a while, showed him how to mend fences, how to read the land. He pretended to listen, but I saw something behind his smile, hunger, maybe greed. Still, I ignored my gut. Because love makes you blind, especially when it's your child's happiness on the line. So I gave and gave and gave, never realizing that every sacrifice I made was building the stage for my own humiliation. But back then, I didn't know that the man I called son would one day strip me of everything I held sacred. Back then, I still believed family meant something. It started with silence. After the wedding, my daughter stopped calling as often. The phone that once rang every evening now felt like a dead thing sitting on the table. I told myself she was just busy, adjusting to married life. I didn't want to believe anything else. Then one afternoon, Eric showed up at my farmhouse. He wasn't smiling this time. He wore a fancy new suit, gold watch glinting in the sun, and a smirk that didn't belong on any honest man's face. "Morning, old man," he said casually, stepping onto my porch like he owned it. "We've been thinking. It's time you move out. The house and land belong to us now." I laughed, thinking it was one of his tasteless jokes, but he didn't laugh back. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You signed the deed over at the wedding," he said, pulling out papers. "It's all legal now." I stared at the pages. My name, my daughter's, signatures I didn't remember writing. The same lawyer who smiled at the reception had notarized them. My hands trembled. "That was symbolic," I whispered. "Just a blessing, not a contract." Eric shrugged. "Symbolic or not, it's official now. The farm is ours." I looked at him, trying to find any trace of humanity in his eyes. There was none, just cold ambition. I went to see my daughter that night, hoping, praying, it was some misunderstanding. She opened the door, dressed in silk, a glass of wine in her hand. "Dad," she said softly, "maybe it's time you rest. You've worked your whole life. Let us handle things." Her words cut deeper than any knife. "Rest?" I asked. "You're taking my home. Your mother's grave is here. Everything I built for you." She looked away. "Eric says it's best this way. We'll build something modern here. You can stay in the city with Aunt May." I felt my knees weaken. The room spun. My own daughter, my blood, was pushing me out of the life I'd given her. "Do you even hear yourself?" I said, my voice shaking. "You're taking everything from me." "You gave it to me," she whispered. I remember stepping out into the night air, my chest burning, eyes wet but refusing to cry. The stars above blurred as I stumbled toward my old truck. Behind me, I heard laughter, Eric's laughter, muffled through the door I'd built with my own hands. The next morning, 2 of his men came with a truck. They loaded my few belongings like I was some squatter being evicted. No goodbye hug, no remorse, just cold eyes and paperwork. As I stood by the dusty road, watching them lock the gates, I realized something terrible. I hadn't just lost my home, I'd lost my daughter. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It was slow, deliberate, calculated. Every smile, every thank you, every word of affection had been a step toward this moment. And as their taillights disappeared down the road, my heart didn't just break. It hardened. That day I buried my grief deep in the soil I once called mine, and in its place something new began to grow, silent, steady, and merciless. Revenge. For weeks I drifted like a ghost, moving through days without meaning, clutching a steaming mug until it went cold, staring at the gate that no longer opened for me. I replayed every conversation, every laugh, every small kindness I'd given, as if some hidden phrase in my memory would rewind time and undo the theft. Grief was a heavy, slow thing. It settled in my bones and made even breathing feel like work. At night, I would wake with the taste of dirt in my mouth and the echo of my daughter's voice telling me to rest, rest, as if living on the land I built from nothing were a leisure activity for the idle. One evening, after a day of useless wandering, I passed by the old well where Mary used to hang her shawl. Through the hedge I saw them, Eric and my daughter, standing in the kitchen window, close, whispering plans with the kind of ease that belongs to people who believe they have already won. My hands curled into fists, so tight, the knuckles shone white. A small boy chased a dog across what had been my soybean patch. The dog bounded through a shallow trench I dug years ago, and the child's laughter split the air like a blade. That laughter was mine once, not theirs. I tried to name the feeling. Was it sorrow, humiliation, or something darker? It wasn't a single thing, but a long, thin thread pulling taut until it snapped. I remembered burying seeds with Mary, teaching my daughter how to plant them straight, how to whisper to the soil so it would keep secrets. I remembered selling the truck to buy her books, staying up nights mending her clothes by a lamp that nearly died. All those small debts I'd paid with calloused hands, were they now receipts for being cast aside? The turning came slowly, like dawn, quiet, inevitable. On the third day after the repossession, I found myself at the fence, running my fingers over the nameplate I had once hammered in. My name, my family's. My heart felt like it had been replaced with a stone that warmed as anger passed through it. Anger sharpened my vision, where grief blurred, rage focused. I stopped thinking of pleading or bargaining. Those had failed me. Begging he, and a smell of dust and old paper that no one respected. I began to count everything they'd taken, years of sweat, a mother's photograph in a cracked frame, tools I'd polished till they sang. The list made my jaw set. It made me ready. This wasn't about being young or old anymore. It was about dignity, about the truth that men owe their word and families owe each other faith. I remembered friends who had once owed me favors, the town clerk who owed me a kindness, the lawyer who had once smiled at me not for the papers, but for my daughter's wedding day. I remembered how the land itself hummed under my feet, as if it waited for me to act. That night, I sat at the kitchen table of my truck, the wind rocking the roof like a metronome. I spoke aloud to no one. "Enough," I said, and the word sounded like a bell. It rolled out of me and cracked the dark. I felt it land in my gut, heavy and true. No more pity, no more sleeping on other people's compassion, no more allowing laughter through the windows of a house that used to belong to me. If they wanted to treat me like an old man with nothing left, I would show them how much was still at stake. I thought about the slow, patient things, law books, old deeds, water lines only I knew, the supplier who still remembered my name. I thought about humility turned to strength, how a man can change the direction of a life by quietly deciding to refuse defeat. I promised myself I would not be a cautionary tale for gossiping mouths. I would be their reckoning. It was not enough to be right. I needed to be inevitable. So I made a vow beneath the same sky that had watched me plant 100 seasons. I would get my farm back, not with fire or fury, but with every intelligent, patient move I had left. I would expose the lies, call in old favors, and let the truth fold their plans like bad paper. And when the dust settled, I would stand at the gate, not as a defeated man, but as the keeper of what I had sown. "Enough," I whispered again, this time with promise. "Enough, and from this day on, revenge will be my harvest." I learned quickly that anger without a map is just noise. So I sat down with a pencil, a thermos of tea, and a notebook that had held everything from seed dates to my daughter's school fees. Line by line, I wrote what I'd lost, and beside each loss, I wrote what could get it back. Not with a shout, with a ledger. First, I did what any farmer does when the weather turns sour. Check the fences, check the foundations. I dug through my attic for any paperwork, old receipts, mortgage notes, water permits, things Eric thought were long forgotten. Some of it was yellowed, nearly illegible. Some of it smelled like the barn. Each scrap was a breadcrumb. I called an old friend, Martin, who used to be a county clerk, on a quiet morning. His voice was surprised but not unkind. "You remember how I used to tell you to keep everything?" he said. I told him exactly where to look. He promised to pull old filings quietly. I paid visits to the supplier who'd delivered seed to my place for 30 years. He looked at me like a dog recognizing an old master. He told me about invoices Eric never paid. "I kept the copies," he said. "You'll need them." I kept my mouth shut, and a smile small enough to not betray my plan. Then I went to see my old lawyer, Mr. Hayes, the man who'd stood in my corner when I couldn't afford his suit. He had a slow, deliberate way of speaking, like someone who'd read the fine print for a lifetime. He flipped through records and raised an eyebrow at a clause no one had mentioned at the wedding, a contingency in my original deed that protected against hasty transfers in the event of a disputed signature. He didn't promise miracles, only that the law sometimes remembers what people try to forget. I started planting seeds of doubt, small things said to the right ears. Over coffee at the diner, I mentioned casually that I'd found conflicting paperwork. At the feed store, I let it slip that investors were nervous. Rumors travel faster than tractors. By the time Eric realized the ground was shifting, the town's whisper had already started to nibble at his confidence. But the real work was quieter. I reactivated accounts in my name that had sat dormant. Water rights, co-op memberships, and a supplier credit he thought unusable. I paid a visit to the tax office and discovered late penalties he hadn't paid. Once flagged, the county took notice. I filed a formal request to review the transaction history on my property. Nothing dramatic, just a paper trail that would take patience to unwind. I recruited allies with favors I'd shelled out over decades. The retired sheriff, who owed me a favor for finding his lost dog. The school teacher who'd once babysat my daughter. The neighbor whose son Eric had cheated on a land deal years before. Each one had a small piece of the puzzle, or the willingness to speak when the time came. I didn't tell my daughter a thing. Silence was my cloak. I let her believe what she wanted while I gathered facts. Every night I cataloged a new discovery. An unpaid bill here, an unrecorded amendment there. Each detail tightened the net. I also played a patient game with Eric himself. I offered help with irrigation, because he'd bragged he didn't need me, and watched how he stumbled over suppliers. I let him feel the confidence of a man propped up by falsehoods while I quietly moved the real supports from under him. I left hints, legal notices delivered to the developer, a polite but piercing letter to the bank, enough to make them pause, not enough to show my hand. I wanted them to act rashly, to expose the truth by trying to hide it. There were knives. I slept with my notebook under my jacket, waking to rewrite strategies. There were mornings I walked the fields and listened, as if the land might whisper what path to take next. It felt like chess. Only the pieces were lives and livelihoods, and you couldn't afford a single careless move. People asked, "Aren't you afraid?" I was. But fear is a good companion if you let it sharpen you instead of dull you. I was more afraid of doing nothing. So I prepared, slowly, quietly, relentlessly. And when the moment came to strike, I didn't want to be remembered as the man who shouted the loudest. I wanted to be the man who made the truth unavoidable. What I will do when I pull the final thread, when the developer walks, when the bank comes calling, when the county opens its files, will make them ask, how did he know? For now I keep my mouth closed and my ledger open. They see an old man who tills and waits. But in my pocket, the papers are stacked like dominoes. And I know with a patient and terrible certainty which one I will topple first. The day I let the first domino fall, I walked onto the land like any other morning, boots heavy, hands steady, but my pockets held papers that would change everything. I started with the smallest thing, a single unpaid invoice at the feed store, the one Eric had skipped, and the supplier had quietly kept a copy of. I handed that copy to Martin, the county clerk, who smiled the way a man smiles when he's finally able to correct a wrong. Within a week, suppliers froze deliveries to Eric's accounts. Stalls of credit turned into locked doors. Next, I served quiet legal notices. Nothing dramatic, just procedural letters demanding proof of full ownership, sent through the channels that made men sweat. I watched Eric stumble when his contractor called to ask for clear title. The developer's patience with him thinned like frost in the sun. At the Sidamsua courthouse, Mr. Hayes filed motions citing that old contingency clause. The judge set a hearing, and Eric's confident grin began to crack. Then I pushed where pride lives, the community. I met with the editor of the local paper, and with documents in hand, told the story plainly. No theatrics, only facts. A front-page article the next morning called the sale into question, and neighbors who had once shrugged at rumors now came forward with their own tales of unpaid debts and false promises. When the bank read those words, it froze the line of credit Eric had been so proud of. But revenge, I'd learned, tastes best with a sting. So I added a twist, a claim on the water rights only I had recorded years ago, a technicality buried in county records that meant any development without my consent would be illegal. The developer, furious at the prospect of legal delay and bad press, walked. He left a stack of unpaid commitments and a contract termination that made Eric's investors sweat. Eric called me a coward over the phone, an old man hiding behind papers. So I drove to his house and handed him the bill for the taxes he'd let slip, right on his own porch. He could not laugh when the sheriff arrived with a notice for unpaid tax liens. When the county came to assess the unpaid levies, they found more: missing filings, suspicious signatures, a notarized form that clearly bore pressure of a hurried hand. I had Martin and the retired sheriff quietly check the signatures. Experts were called in, handwriting compared. The truth surfaced like a fish from deep water. Some signatures weren't what they claimed to be. Fraud investigations opened. Investors sued. Suppliers demanded payment. The house was encumbered by claims that would take more than Eric's pride to lift. My daughter finally stood at my gate, eyes rimmed with red, begging and trembling. "Dad, please, we can fix this, please." I looked at her and felt the ache to take her back like a wound. Instead, I let the law and the town speak. Let them watch the unravel. When the lawyers presented the evidence in court, Eric's face went pale. The same men who'd once patted him on the back now looked away. There was one more turn I kept for the end. "Remember that old friend of mine who had once found the sheriff's lost dog? He ran a small auction house. Quietly, he listed redundant equipment from the farm: tractors, hand tools, a pickup. Items Eric assumed were sold or scrubbed from records. Bidders from 3 counties came. The sale was public, with the paperwork I'd quietly refiled making each item traceable back to my true ownership. The auction returned cash and a public record that proved my claim. When the sheriff handed me the formal notice restoring certain rights, I didn't shout. I only walked through the gate, palms open to the wind. Eric left town that week with a cardboard box and a number of new legal battles to face. His name, once shiny on business cards, became mud in the mouths of those who used to trust him. The developer's promise of glossy homes remained a headline about failed projects. His investors counted losses and dodged interviews. The final humiliation came not from me, but from the town that remembered who had always kept his word. Neighbors I'd helped for decades showed up at the hearing, testimony after testimony, painting a picture of a man who'd given everything to raise his daughter. When the judge read the ruling, the courtroom hummed like a hive, a rebuke of the deceit, partial restoration of the farm, and a mandate for Eric to answer for the fraud and unpaid obligations. I didn't dance. I didn't gloat. The justice was not a trumpet, but a long, slow exhale. My daughter wept in the hallway. Shame and sorrow tangled together. She pressed her forehead to my shoulder, and for a moment, I let her. "Why did you do it?" she asked between sobs. "For the truth," I said. "And for the land." In the end, the people who betrayed me were exposed. Their contracts torn open for all to see, their reputations shredded, their schemes reduced to ink on paper and courtroom transcripts. They had wanted to make me invisible. Instead, I became the lens that revealed them. The farm was bruised but not broken. The fences needed mending, the soil needed rest, but my name was on the gate again, and the fields answered my boots. And when I walked past the house that night, the moon cast long shadows that seemed to bow. I had not sought to ruin lives for sport, only to reclaim what was mine, and to let justice, however slow, reach its hand into the space they'd tried to steal. They said I was lucky. I know better. I was patient, I was careful, and I refused to be small. Revenge had come not as a shout, but as a patient harvest, and the taste, bitter and necessary, settled in my chest like a lesson learned the hard way. When the dust finally settled, the air around the farm felt different, cleaner, quieter, almost sacred again. For the first time in years, I woke before sunrise, not out of habit or worry, but because I wanted to see the morning light stretch across the fields I'd fought to keep. The soil smelled the same as it did when I was young, wet, alive, forgiving. But I wasn't the same man anymore. The courthouse victory hadn't brought celebration, only silence. People in town treated me differently now. They'd stop me at the feed store or at Sunday service, saying things like, "You showed them, Frank," or "Justice was on your side." But I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like a survivor, someone who had walked through fire and came out with ash still clinging to his heart. My daughter came around sometimes, slower now, eyes softer than they used to be. She'd bring groceries or a pie, or just sit on the porch and watch the wind move through the wheat. Once she whispered, "I should have listened, Dad." And I told her the truth. No one listens until the storm hits. What matters is what you do afterward. We didn't talk much after that, but her silence wasn't cold anymore. It was learning, healing. As for Eric, last I heard, he'd left town. Too many debts, too many burned bridges. I didn't rejoice in that. I pitied him, because a man who builds his life on greed will always end up living in ruins of his own making. He thought I was just an old farmer clinging to dirt, but that dirt was legacy, sacrifice, and memory. It was everything he could never buy. The nights got longer after the courtroom was empty. I'd sit by the fire, looking at the photo of my wife, remembering her voice. Take care of our girl, no matter what. I did, in my own way. I protected her, even when she couldn't see the wolves she'd welcomed. Maybe that's what fatherhood really is, loving someone enough to let them face their mistakes, but standing close enough to catch them when they fall. I rebuilt the porch railing myself that summer. It felt good to work with my hands again, to fix something that would stay fixed. Neighbors started visiting again, bringing tools, asking for advice, helping mend fences I hadn't had the strength to face before. It reminded me that life, even after betrayal, goes on, stubborn and beautiful. There's peace now, a quiet kind that doesn't shout. I walk the fence lines every evening, listening to the crickets and the soft hum of the world I nearly lost. The anger that once kept me awake has turned into something gentler, wisdom maybe, or just understanding that revenge doesn't heal wounds. It only stops the bleeding long enough for you to start tending the scars yourself. Sometimes I see young couples at church, bright-eyed, full of promises, and I wonder if they understand how fragile trust really is. How easy it is to mistake kindness for weakness, and how costly that mistake can become. I don't warn them, though. Some lessons have to be lived, not told. But if someone asked me now what I learned, I'd tell them this. Don't give away the keys to what you've built, be it land, love, or legacy, unless the person asking has earned your faith through fire and time, because some people only see value in what they can take, not in what they can build. And still, forgiveness is a strange thing. I don't know if I've forgiven them, not fully, but I've forgiven myself for trusting too easily. That's a start. The farm still stands, the earth still gives, and so long as I draw breath, I'll guard it not out of bitterness, but out of gratitude. The sun sets slow these days, burning gold over the fields, and I take it as a sign that even after betrayal, beauty remains. I survived greed, humiliation, and loss, but I found something rarer on the other side. Peace, earned the hard way. Moral. Sometimes life takes everything from you just to show you what truly matters. Revenge might balance the scales, but only forgiveness and wisdom let you walk away free. And as I stand on this land, my land, I know one thing for sure. It's not what you lose that defines you. It's what you refuse to surrender.